Dear New York Times, my name is Chad White. I'm from Atlanta. I've been a subscriber for 3 years. I like to pretend to read the articles to make me seem smarter to women. Women like smart men. I could actually read the articles, but they're way too confusing. I'm writing to you today because I saw the opinion piece by the Republican Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton where he said he thought the military should be called in to hurt protesters. I thought it was really bad. He is clearly not a good person. Just look at his stupid, gangly neck and how he smiles by only showing his top teeth. I wrote down that I shuddered because I did shudder writing this. I'm glad you're moving forward, taking this giant mistake in stride and learning from it. Stories like this are not needed. I have more suggestions for your future endeavors. Make the crossword easier. It's way too hard. And do the same for the mini crossword. That's hard too. You know what? It'd be cool if you just made a crossword that's 3 or 4 spaces long for one word. That way I'd be able to complete it more often. And the cooking section doesn't have enough recipes involving tuna and cheese combinations. Finally, tell John Caramonica to listen to my mixtape. I've sent the Memorex mini disc to the office nearly a dozen times. You might recognize it as the stickiest package in the pile. Please don't ask why it's so sticky. I have more suggestions ready to go. I'll give them to you for a fee. Feel free to contact me at chadrock6969@aol.com or by phone at Klondike 5-3226. Also, please tell internet culture reporter Taylor Renz I said, "What's up?" But like in a cool way. Like, "Hey girl," but not that. Make me sound more interesting and less desperate. Don't tell her I like her. But do ask if she likes me. If not, play it off. Then try again in a few days. Best wishes, Chad. It's news time. Delivering to you the news you didn't know about, the news you didn't care about, and the news you didn't know you cared about. With host, Chad White. Now, here's that host, Chad White. Welcome back to News Time. I'm your host, Chad White, and this is the New York Times news you didn't know about. The nation, nay, the world, has been gobsmacked with hundreds of protests based around the senseless killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, among countless other victims as perpetrated by the police. Unsurprisingly, everyone has an opinion on the direction of the Black Lives Matter movement and subsequent protests, yet, surprisingly, they're not all the same. Almost universally, people would tell you the protests are needed to bring racial injustices to the front of the societal consciousness. Yet, then there are those who, for some reason, think that not protesting is the key, which, no. Blacks, people of color, and women have been protesting for decades. You are just too white to hear it. Now that we live in an increasingly connected society, these messages have grown louder. So too have dissenting opinions, though. Last week, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, what a name, published an opinion piece in the New York Times calling for a militaristic response to the Black Lives Matter protests around the states. He dubbed the movement as, quote, plunging American cities into anarchy, quote, citing that only an, quote, overwhelming show of force would, quote, disperse, detain, and ultimately deter lawbreakers. In other words, he's saying fight the peacefulness that was met with violence, with more violence, that could then end in 100 times more death. This was the same reasoning that police used during the civil rights movement when they turned the powerful hoses onto protesters. Hard to believe that almost 70 years later, we're still dealing with trying to get the same basic human rights for everybody. Increasingly enough, the Times published this loosely researched essay even after the company reported on misinformation in the media surrounding the protests. You know, things like how the protests are organized by the far-left anti-fascism activist movement Antifa, or how if you rub your feet on the carpet, then try to touch the stolen iPhones that you picked up at the Apple store during the protest, the static shock is enough to shut off the radios used to track the device, getting you off scot-free of that grand theft charge. So Cotton's piece was published on Wednesday. Vitriol would soon follow. Times staff, including top reporters, would immediately take to social media to denounce the essay. 800 staffers signed a letter condemning it. The News Guild of New York denounced it too, and unions are historically for everything. Some reporters even called out their employer to its face, and well deserved too. If I did that to my boss, I wouldn't be able to sit down for a week because he beat me. If you think that's unfunny, then you're going to be less impressed when you find out that my boss is me. It wasn't until Thursday that the Times sent out an apology. Rushed editorial processes and not meeting standards were reasons given as to why the essay slipped through the cracks. But don't multiple excuses make them look bad? My ex told me all the reasons she didn't want to be with me, and I stopped asking after the second round, and it still hurts. That part's not a joke. The Gray Lady is 168 years old, so this is hardly the first time something like this has ever happened. Editor Barry Weiss has seen her fair share of backlash. That's an understatement, but just roll with it. David Brooks was on the wrong side of both the Me Too and gun violence debates. And the president says the paper is failing. Can't this rag catch a break? This past Sunday, editorial editor James Bennett resigned from his post thanks to this mess up. And it's not his first one since he started at the position in 2016, one of which is probably going to result in a lawsuit from Sarah Palin. Well, you remember her. She's the one who can see Alaska from her backyard and whose family is more Hatfield and McCoys than the Brady Bunch. That's not to say Bennett, really great dig for 2008. That's not to say Bennett didn't publish a good amount of journalism. The Times points out that he was the one who helped bring anonymous Trump administration officials' opinions on the failing state of the former camp, as well as other more conservative viewpoints that would challenge the mostly liberal readership, as pointed out by Vox. But the bad outweighs the good. The one shining spot in the empty space that is this story is that the discussion of an editor with not so good sensibilities are being brought up all over newsrooms from coast to coast. Like every other job, problems exist within the newsroom, whether it's a sexist publication standard or a local news station's thinking a better use of a handsome young writer's time is to write 200-word cold case stories and not a previously pitched story on the history of protesting during the 2016 election, which is totally real. Reporting the news without bias is tough. It's got to be one of the most difficult jobs based on how quickly the public can react to it alone. One wrong word can result in days of attacks, which can also result from things like broken confidence to job loss. It happens just like that. And because of the internet, it's so fast and often demeaning. Yeah, construction or accounting might be harder physically and mentally, respectively, but if you make a mistake here, it can either A, be fixed immediately, or B, be fixed somewhere down the line. Both without much of, if any, flack from outside eyes. There's no one not in the profession sitting next to you saying you're dumb or bad at your job or telling you to quit and kill yourself or making fun of how you look in a picture. Reporters are dealing with that with every word they post. That's why getting facts right is so important. But so is being a decent human being. Cotton shouldn't have written the piece. Bennett shouldn't have published it. Maybe it's time to take into account just the facts and not the opinions any longer. And speaking of things you can take in, why don't you take in subscribing and check out one of our other videos? Of course, you can head to the website cpluscomedy.com where there's so many great interviews with your favorite comedians, you'll wonder why they're talking to me. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at cpluscomedy. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChadBlackWhite. Like us on Facebook. Listen to the Constitutionalist podcast wherever you get your podcast. And, oh, it looks like Taylor responded to me. Taylor Lorenz, you sneaky. Oh, it's a restraining order.